Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Anderson Ranch and welcome to the guest faculty lecture series. My name is Esther and I'm the studio coordinator for photography and new media. How's everyone feeling? I love the enthusiasm. So tonight we will have two of our faculty share their work with us, and it will be followed by a Q&A, so be sure to have your questions ready for both of our speakers at the end of their sessions. I also want to remind everyone that tomorrow at 8:45 we do have a ranch-wide orientation right here in this building, so be sure to be here at 8:45 and learn about all the cool events happening here on the ranch this week. The second reminder is I would like everyone to reach into your pocket and silence your cell phone. Pretty please. Our first speaker tonight is Richard Rinaldi. We can clap for Richard, yes. Richard was born in Chicago and received his BFA in photography from New York University in 1990. He's represented by Ben Ruby Gallery in New York and Robert Moret Gallery in Berlin. 5 monographs of his work have been published, including Richard Rinaldi, Figure and Ground from Aperture, Fall River Boys from Charles Lane Press in 2009, Touching Strangers, Aperture in 2014, Manhattan Sunday, again Aperture, I Want Your Love, Super Labo in 2018, and he was the recipient of a 2015 fellow from the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. Exhibitions of his photographs have been organized in galleries and museums throughout the United States, Asia, and Europe, including the House of Photography in Stockholm, the Robert Moret Gallery in Hamburg, Aperture Gallery, Bonnie and Ben Ruby Gallery, and many, many more. So please give Richard a warm ranch welcome. And me too.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. It's not like you had a choice, though. So, I think, how do we get the screen on? Oh, there we go. Okay. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Okay, that's the first slide. This is a new talk. You guys are guinea pigs, so please bear with me if there's some, mental hiccups. But I wanted to show the newest work I'm making, and I'm very excited about it. But it's not, you won't see it till the end, because you have to contextualize where things come from. I think you have to tell the story of how you got somewhere. And so, like for me, I grew up in Chicago, and I grew up in a really wealthy neighborhood called the Gold Coast. I spent most of my adolescence there. And so I went to school at public school, and we went to school with kids from the projects. So like this idea of class entered my consciousness from a very young age. Also, like my father owned a textile factory on the south side of Chicago, and all the people that worked in the factory, and I would work there in the summer in like out on the factory floor, were all very blue collar working class guys. So there was always this contrast and a way of informing me about the different social and economic tiers that we live in and under. So these are all pictures I made when I was very young. So like really near where I grew up were the Cabrini Green housing projects. It was like literally less than a mile away. And so like my mother told me that I was forbidden to enter that neighborhood. And so I think I digested from that my life existed on like this great divide between different members, different races and classes. So fast forward, like I started doing photography in high school. I studied it. I went to NYU. I'm wearing the purple to match this slide. No. So after I graduated, I really became very early on, I gravitated towards working on projects, long-term projects, where I would like find a subject and theme that was attractive to me, and then I just would go out and photograph it over and over for sometimes many years. This particular project was the first one I started after I've graduated from NYU. So I started photographing. This is the Christopher Street Piers, and at the time in the 90s, it was sort of the Wild West because it was unpatrolled. It was kind of gay turf, I would say, and its history. The piers were kind of became an alternative queer space after World War II, when the soldiers and sailors were coming home from the war, and they all the piers on the west side of Manhattan were where all the ships docked, and so they started to spring up bars and watering holes, and some of those spaces, towards after the Beat generation, became gay spaces or underground at that point. So the piers have this really strong gay cultural history to them, and this is the one project that I've been working on now for next year. It'll be 30 years, with some lags in time over the years, and this is kind of like where a lot of the kids, Black and Latino kids especially, that were often they grew up in very macho, traditional religious households, and a lot of them were like, when they came out or their parents found out they were gay, they were often became homeless, and their families rejected them. And so they created these surrogate families they were called houses, and they had different house mothers. And so there was the voguing scene that started in New York in the 80s and early 90s. They would congregate out at the piers on the weekends and then vogue and dance and sashay until the sun went down. And so it was like really inspiring to photograph the scene there. And often this is a transsexual prostitute. And this is what the pier looked like. Now, prior to the 90s, there was actually buildings on these piers, but they tore them down. They were so unsafe that they tore them down sometime in the early 1980s. So this is where I kind of really kind of developed my skills of being a portrait photographer and walking up to people and making street portraits and street photographs. And then in 1999, they tore the pier down. And it was a multi-year project, a combination of private and public funding to create a new park called the Hudson River Park. And so this is this is around 2010. And now you can see the quality has changed from like a film to digital. These are very recent. So often, I observed that, especially with this population, this demographic, that social status was often gained through your appearance, style, and fashion. And so, in the mid-90s, I started to notice the contrast between the people at the piers and the people up on the Upper East Side in New York, Madison Avenue. And this sort of there was in a way this kind of parallel between this gaining status or having status through your appearance. And I thought it was an interesting contrast, though I didn't think about this till years later. Even the kids that danced at the piers, the names of the houses where they had surrogate mothers were named House of Chanel, House of Extravaganza, House of La Beja, House of Gucci. And so they're naming themselves after this other neighborhood. And so I started photographing Madison Avenue around 96, 97. And again, so then you become aware of this, the class difference and the contrast between a poor and working class community and this very upper class 1%. And then a life change happened where I met my husband in '98, and he was a photographer, and he happened to also come with this view camera. And I hadn't been doing too much work with the 8x10 at all, really. I shot 4x5 in high school like once. But I was really curious about it, and so I decided that I wanted to get to learn how to use the view camera. And so I rented one before borrowing my partner's, and he eventually officially gave it to me because he had stopped photographing. And this was the first or second exposure I ever made with the view camera on Madison Avenue. So I went back there and started doing much more formal portraits. And so I started to, again, respond to the work I was making and kind of feel like there was another conversation growing out of that, and photographing people that had all, like, appeared to have a lot of time and disposable income on their hands to go shopping and strolling the avenue. And I started thinking about the people that made all of that possible, which was the workers. And I was also really investigating photography, and I was learning about August Saunders' People of the 20th Century, and I was very inspired by his cataloging of all types of German citizens in Weimar Germany. So those two things inspired me to start a new project with a view camera called Workers. And so I started photographing. This was before 9/11, because I was really lucky to get out there on the tarmac. And all these were all like, this project taught me how to, like, okay, I want to make a picture of a hotel maid. Like, how do I do that? You know, you got to write some marketing, you got to, like, make these introductions, you got to make this stuff happen. And it's, self-funded photography, so there's no big umbrella above me that could make this happen. So this was a really good experience for me. This is a woman whose name's Sana. So then I went on, and I kind of just, I did a new project wanting to explore Newark, New Jersey, which is this, city of almost 300,000 people in the shadow of New York. And I was it always was kind of like, had a blighted reputation, kind of butt of the joke kind of city. And so I wanted to go document it and explore it. And so I would take the PATH train with the view camera and just wheel it around until I saw, like, a possible picture to make. This is cool. This is Ravi. And I think I made this in 2002 or 2001. And about 4 years ago, he became the mayor of Hoboken. So and so again, I developed, as I was, like, advancing with my experience, I kind of developed a style of taking my subjects and isolating them and kind of just letting them inhabit the space entirely and not have other people, and letting them occupy really the center of the frame often. So just put a pin next to this picture and the other one of the woman at McDonald's, Sana, that I showed you. This is Faith. And then I contrasted Newark with a project on Fresno, California, and this was one of my first shows in an art gallery. I showed the Fresno and Newark work together, and I thought Fresno was a very comparable kind of city on the West Coast to Newark. And another project that I started was on a very working class community in New England and Massachusetts called Fall River. And I got to know Fall River from my trips out to the Cape, to Provincetown in the 90s. And it's a very picturesque city on the Taunton River. And you go over this bridge, and I decided, like, after having passed it like 3 or 4 times, that actually I wanted to get off the exit and see what Fall River was about. And so I did, and I noticed that it was a lot of machismo existed there, a lot of like like a way of the men and boys displayed themselves that I found intriguing and appealing. So I decided that I would go make pictures there on another trip. And I was actually also drawn to the old mills. There were a lot of beautiful old cotton mills. It was one of the largest cotton milling cities in North America in the 19th century. And so, yeah, so I did this investigation, and it was the project in the book is called Fall River Boys, and I photographed there for almost 9 years. And this is a barber school. And so then I started a lot of road tripping. I think I was telling my students that I started taking all these drives across the country, and I was working on a project, the next project, called See America by Bus. But I ended up also doing just kind of random portraits and landscapes out west, and that work eventually became this project, which is called Western Lives. But, you know, just like a lot of looking at and seeing and celebrating just real people. You know, not for me. I had always kind of had I should tell you that a little background is I worked at Magnum Photos as a photo researcher in the 1990s, and so a lot of the work I worked with was like photojournalism, which was, it's kind of a very kind of often a grab and go kind of style. And I loved the exposure, and I loved working there, and I loved meeting all these great photographers. But I also think I learned that that's not the kind of photography I wanted to do. I wanted to have a little slower and a little more meaningful interactions, or at least something that I felt more safe doing, because I didn't want to be a war photographer. So, and also fashion never really appealed to me either. I just never really, I thought the artifice was in a way often overpowered the humanity behind the subjects. So I've always been drawn to real people and telling that, you know, just stories. And so this is the other project that had brought me kind of all over the country, which was called See America by Bus. And I was also kind of interested, after 9/11, a lot of people stopped flying, and bus travel became kind of popular again for a short time. And simultaneously, the Great Plains especially were leaching out the young people, and there was not a lot of economic activity throughout the plains until at least the shale oil boom in 2009. But prior to that, like Greyhound started cutting service to a lot of these towns. And I just thought that also, I saw a movie when I was a young kid called Dawn, Portrait of a Teenage Runaway. And Dawn runs away from home, and she takes the Greyhound bus to the Hollywood bus station, and she gets off the bus, and there's a pimp waiting for her. And she, you know, it's like one of these after-school special morality things. It was played by Jan Brady, if you guys know the Brady Bunch. So she was the actress. So Eve Blum. So I had all these notions about bus travel, but I knew it was like very much an underclass of Americans generally traveled by bus. But in my investigation, I found out that it was also a hodgepodge, really, of all different types of people, and often European travelers would travel by Greyhound. And I got permission from Greyhound to use the tripod and photograph in stations all across the country. So that's how this project was born. And I worked on this for about 5 years. And a lot of these projects, time-wise, overlap. Speaking of time, just make sure. Okay, I need to speed up a little bit. and the pictures are titled like where they're going, like they're starting an end point of their bus journey. That's Jaime. The girl on the left is Dawn, and this is Sabrina, and I think they contrast pretty amazingly. Whoops. And then, whoops. Sorry. Let's see. Go back. Okay, so this picture was sort of the springboard for the next project, which is Touching Strangers, which I'm just going to show briefly here. But like the people on the left didn't know that guy on the right, and this was a moment that I thought was really interesting and challenging, how to make a portrait of two groups of people that didn't know each other. And so it took some orchestrating, like, do you guys mind if I take your picture? Oh, and do you mind if not moving and being in the picture with these strangers next to you? And that's how I kind of like wanted to explore that more, and that's how I came up with the idea for the next project, which was actually taking two or more strangers and asking them to take a portrait together, touching each other. And I worked on this for like 7 years, and it was it went viral like multiple times. It has a life of its own, and yeah, it's you know, the pairs of people often talk about you know, our sort of different tribes that we come from, and different classes and racial mixing, and yeah, it was, I think, a really interesting and challenging exploration for me photographically. This is back on Madison Avenue, a touching stranger. And this was at a SRO motel in Las Vegas. I thought these, then my next project after that was called Manhattan Sunday, and it was more personal for me. It was about nightlife, and predominantly, but not exclusively, gay nightlife in New York City, and a kind of love letter to New York as well. A collection of cityscapes and in photographs inside and outside of the club in the early light of day. So I worked on this for about 5 years. And black and white always felt right to me for this project. I wanted to live kind of in a more ethereal, dreamlike space. And here's, of course, cleaning up after. And so there was this, for me, the class issue in this is like the revelers and then the people cleaning up after them. And that's, most of the book is about the nightclubbers, but that's Sergio. But also there's these moments where you have the first people you see in the morning, besides the ambitious joggers, are the street cleaners. Look at the number of the cab spells SAS. And a sex worker, 14th Street from the High Line. So this brings us to COVID, and this is a body of work, a small one I just did on frontline workers at the grocery store. But again, a concern with, like, you know, these workers that were, at the time, it seemed like they were taking a great risk for our benefit, and I wanted to do a small series of portraits honoring them. Okay, so we're back to sort of like remembering all these kind of pictures from different projects of fast food restaurant workers. So like that was always in my head. It seemed like there was like a series within a series. And so in 2019, I went out and I started a new project called Billion Served. And originally the inspiration was to photograph fast food restaurant workers. And I wanted to hit national, regional, and international chains. So I've been working on this now for three and a half years, and photographed all over America, basically. I'm hoping this will be my next published project. But again, it's hard to get people to care about actually blue-collar working people. But I've had a really good time making this work, and it's been, it's either they say yes, or I go up to the manager and give them my spiel, and they say either yes, or if they say, "Oh, we got to call corporate," it's like I just leave because that's not going to happen. She looks like Wendy. I found Wendy. And black and white, always. I wanted to strip away the corporate identity branding. I wanted to really humanize the subjects by not having them so affiliated with their logos and the colors of the different chains. That's Jollibee. It's a Filipino chain. And so it straddles both COVID, pre-COVID, during lockdown, and then more recent. And then I got a little let's tell the full story. And so this is the newest work. I've taken 3 shooting trips this year. I made this in June in Atlanta. And so I'm doing all the patrons. So I'm kind of going to round out Billions Served. And I thought that the patrons should be in color, that there should be this contrast between the workers and the customers. This, to me, has this Grant Wood American Gothic kind of feeling. But again, it's who eats fast food? Everyone. It's all of us. And so to me, there's this. Some of us don't. Okay, some of us are whatever. But most people have indulged in fast food at some point in their life, and it's affordable. That's who a lot of people, that's what they can afford, or all they have time for, because they're too busy working. So I think it's a really important story to tell. I hope you guys like it, and I think that's the last slide. Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. Our next speaker is Wendy White. Her work encompasses painting, sculpture, and installation, defying the boxed-in limitations of the traditional canvas. Born in Deep River, Connecticut, White lives and works in New York City and has a BFA from Savannah College of Art and Design and an MFA from Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers University. Wendy White's work hovers between tangibility and meditation and rooted in geometry. Her paintings are often composed of several canvases and incorporate digital prints and sculptural elements. Not only does White question the standard rectangular canvas, but she also goes further to question the immediate instinct of the viewer to create meaning from text. She has exhibited extensively, including the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, M. Woods in Beijing, China, Museum of Fine Arts in Japan, Bemis Center in Omaha, Indianapolis Museum of Contemporary Art, and many, many others. So please welcome Wendy White.
should still be hooked up here, right? I really enjoyed that. That was awesome. Your work is amazing. And I think you very much illustrate what I'm going to be talking about and what my class is about this week. Let me see if I can get this to work. No.
Yeah, that's it.
That was it?
Yeah, that's it. Wait, let me
Really?
turn the projector on and you're good to go.
All right. Cool. Okay, good. Let me move this. So this is my third time teaching here. And I teach a workshop called Studio Momentum. And it's kind of a philosophy that I came up with and developed that's actually, it's very simple. It's just about following one body of work to the next, finding some thread, finding something that is a departure point. It's something that you spoke about very eloquently from one body of work to the next. There was something that a thing that you found about someone that maybe was a jumping off point, or it was a visual moment. This is the thing that you can't really be taught to do. And I think there's somewhat of a business model as artists that I think can get in the way of this very easily. So it's something that I'm always striving for in the studio, is not allowing myself to not do something because I think it doesn't look like what I've already made, or feels disjointed somehow. So the class that I teach is basically like letting your intellectual curiosity and the materials propel the next step, even if it means a very radical visual shift. So I work in series. I make big changes in my work. I've always done it. At first, it was not well received, but if you do it long enough, people just kind of have to accept it. And then you become somebody that they don't expect the same thing from. But especially as painters, I think the history of painting, and I make sculpture and installation and other stuff too, but as painters, that just overwhelming history that you shoulder, and I didn't even study painting as an undergrad, but it's just this weight that is, you just feel like the weight of history is constantly on you, and that you can't make radical shifts, that you have to like spend 6 months moving a line 1/4 of an inch. And I do not subscribe to that. I think you should just make the work that you need to make, even if it's out of left field or feels weird, if you think people aren't going to get it. And a lot of times the thing that bugs people is the best thing about it, and you should do it more. So I have really condensed my slideshow. Starting with my most recent work, I really am going to try to keep to a 20-minute time limit. So I'm taking out like whole entire bodies of work, years. But I practice this philosophy in my own studio. So it often results in a new body of work for every new exhibition. So motifs are constant and may reoccur. Some series I leave back for a few years and then pick up years later and add to with a different material. The way that content floats through my work is through materials. I started as a fiber undergrad. So I didn't know, I mean, I'm from a really small town. I didn't know any artists. I didn't know that you could be an artist. I didn't really know what it was. I thought you could be an illustrator, or you could draw like Disney cells, or I just didn't know that studio art was a thing. I was very, very naive about that when I went to art school. And my mind was just blown. And I was kind of shuttled into fibers because there was no sculpture program and I wanted to make 3-dimensional objects. And my undergrad program didn't have sculpture. So I ended up in fibers. To make a long story short, it made me a very materials-oriented painter. It also made me very irreverent to painting. It's one like tool for me. But as I said, most of my series are ongoing. Sometimes I don't add to them for years at a time. But I'd say I'm not a very chronological artist at all. I move around, I skip around, and my whole philosophy is giving myself permission to do that. Right now I'm working on, this is my latest body of work. These are these new painting sculpture combos that were inspired by early Alexander Calder prototypes. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but in the late 30s, he made a few pieces where he had like a really crappy, warped like board that he found somewhere in the studio, and he hung it on the wall. It almost became a painting, but it was very, I mean, it wasn't very painterly. There wasn't a lot happening. Sort of a minimal board, maybe one color. And then he made these little armatures to hang mobiles in front of them. So it was just kind of a way, to me, of creating a context within which to view this small mobile, create a background, some controlled way that the viewer would have to see it. I had been making mobiles and suspended sculptures for several years, and seeing those prototypes, I thought this is a way to conflate painting and these hanging pieces, these suspended pieces, into a very kind of graphic painting sculpture combo. So my Calder-esque versions have painted wood frames. I make everything. I'm also a super handmade person. I make my own stretchers. I make my own frames. The only thing I don't make are the CNC routed, the rainbows, the drops, etc. My go-tos are the single drop, the pixelated heart, which represents lives and health in video games. You'll see that in some of my slides. And the cloud and rainbow, or just a rainbow, all taken from clip art. I showed these new After Calder paintings for the first time in LA earlier this year at Shulamit Nazarian. That's my gallery there. It's my second show at the gallery. And I asked them, they said, maybe don't do, these are the things that people tell me. This is like my life. The gallery was like, maybe don't do installation this time. Maybe just, how about like a painting show? Like everybody just wants to see the paintings on a white wall. And I was like, first I was really mad and spent weeks being mad at them and saying, I'm not doing it. I'm doing what I want. And then finally I was like, wait a minute. If I ask them to make these custom risers throughout the gallery, then it's an installation, but nobody really knows I've created this whole installation, and it just functions as this way of putting light back onto the work. And so I feel like we came to a good spot. So I wanted to riff on museum-style presentation. So in particular, like modernist era works, when they're, I think it was invented by maybe even Pace Gallery for Rothko, I think. These risers that would they designate a viewing space so you couldn't get that close to a three-dimensional work or a work that they didn't want you to touch, and also they would reflect light back onto them. So it's sort of this like sublime. Mine's more tongue-in-cheek. I'm always trying to push painting away, I think. Painting is the thing that I find the most problematic. So I'm always looking for ways to subject it to some other real-world circumstances, in this case, architecture. Concurrent with the After Calder series, I've been making epoxy resin sculptures that are peace symbols in various stages of activity and repose. These guys are kind of striding through my recent installations, lying around on the risers, hanging off the edge of pedestals. These are like three-dimensional drawings for me. I wanted something in this show that wasn't solid. Obviously, the paintings themselves are very atmospheric, but I wanted something that you had to look through. So I wanted a sculpture that could sit in front of a painting and not completely block a painting. Obviously, they are Giacometti inspired. They're super spindly and linear, but I didn't want a figure. I wanted a symbol. I wanted to personify a symbol somehow. So I didn't want there to be a human presence, but I wanted there to be a figurative presence, if that makes sense. So these guys are kind of worn out. They're tired. They're bored. You get it, what I'm talking about. I wanted a sculpture that had this kind of skulking presence, thin, linear enough that I could place them in the space and have them function as kind of a drawing in space. I've been putting things in front of paintings for a really long time. This is a piece from 2007 from my first real show in New York at Leo Koenig Gallery, the first of 3 shows there. I talked about the fibers thing. I think that really When I came to painting, I was already adulterated by materials. I didn't think of it as this is a surface for making an image, or this is I thought of it as wood that you stretched a substrate around, and that already carried meaning. And then you were putting something else on top of that. And I could never understand how painters weren't dealing with this object that they were putting whatever they were doing on top of. I've always found painting to be much more exciting when it's forced to interact with real-world surroundings via architecture or something that takes up 3D space. So in this piece, there's a steel armature that screws into the floor and holds up a fluorescent yellow softball. This was kind of about like focal point and just the kind of ludicrous nature of focal point in painting and composition. So literally lifting the focal point out of the painting and setting it on a pedestal in front. But it's not a pedestal, it's basically a Home Depot. I think I was super broke when I made these paintings, and they were like 16 feet, and the market crashed, and nobody bought them. It was a crazy time. But this is just like a right off the rack Home Depot piece of steel plumbing pipe that's been painted in a flange. Last year, I made a series of large-scale mobiles from steel, dye bond, and LED. The mobiles also function for me as drawings in space. They push the paintings into the background, and they create this sort of like, depending on where you're standing, you have to look through them in order to see paintings. This show was called Mark and Fill, which was a personification of two basic painting or drawing moves, which nobody got it. They're like, Mark and Fill. I wanted it to function, the whole show, kind of as a vibe. I made these faux wood grain paintings after New York was all boarded up. And I felt like they'd become like all this plywood that was everywhere for a while became this very unlikely space for art to happen. There were notes left there. There were kind of moments, just sort of I was here moments. And I felt like they told a really beautiful but kind of tragic story. And I'd been thinking about that I was here moment for years, like how we just have the urge to put our mark somewhere, whether it's making a painting that ends up somewhere or whether it's just, writing somebody's phone number on a brick wall. Just something about leaving our mark and that very, very basic human desire to be seen. The black in this exhibition was really important as a color and as a material. I'm always thinking of materials in terms of them liquefying and then congealing back into some other place in an exhibition. So this one, I wanted it to carry from the solidity of a pixel heart into this handcrafted. That's what you see. The side of is a peace symbol that's been molded by hand out of epoxy, and then of course the digitally printed carpet that is the final liquefaction. It's about kind of leaving a mark and a residual mark and kind of what's left. I'm using the black epoxy resin for the sculptures and also to make drip frames for atmospheric small paintings. This is another new series that's happening right now. I love this resin because it's very malleable. It's non-toxic. It's easy to work with. It's like a two-part sculpting resin. I use a really simple, like aluminum armature underneath, and it takes every bit of the hand. Like it takes your fingerprints if you want them there, or you can use water and smooth things out. So it's just very easy and very direct and very additive. I would love to maybe cast these in bronze someday, but the whole process of doing that doesn't interest me at all. I like to build things. So right now I'm very happy building these small pieces and having them just be one-offs. But there's something really, to me, very conceptually on point about a material that cures. It starts out malleable, but then cures into a super rigid state, and using that to mold drips. It just felt like, it's this, it just felt right. the drip's been in my work for a really long time. I've made mirror drip frame paintings with these very hazy surfaces. This is a painting from 2015, and now I'm kind of going back to this surface again in the newer works. These had logos from Surf Gear, and some of them were more text-based and had canvas-wrapped frames. So the drip is just this very, like, to me it's a profound but very simple device for indicating that a material could be solid and then be liquid again. So very profoundly relates to process and materials, this series. Probably one of the weirder things I've done is to make giant paintings about sports. This is a whole series of paintings about a couple of Yankees games in the ALCS, the Midge game. Probably nobody remembers, but I made a lot of paintings about sports and a lot of work with digital images, and a lot of work that borders on representation and moments of representation and abstraction. A lot of work where text is architecture or text is some kind of building structure. But one of the weirdest things I've done is to make custom carpets for paintings that would sit on the ground like this one, as if the palette had drained out onto the floor. And maybe I have done weirder things to paintings. Last year for this group show in Detroit, I turned a freestanding wall into a site-specific neon installation with a curtain that framed a multiple canvas painting. And this painting is stacks of Uniroyal tires, which are made in Detroit, and a manipulated Moroso oil logo. I've done a couple curtain installations, or curtains kind of revealing paintings. I also did a solo armory show booth that was a convertible installation where the curtains could move to reveal a second body of work. Again, I'm super condensing and skipping like massive swaths of things. The corner rainbow paintings, that's a big motif for me. It started in 2019. I had been making suspended dye-bond sculptures, and I started to see this half rainbow as a stand-in for optimism, but also as a formal connector. Like I thought, how can I use this to connect seemingly disparate images? So these are images of the classic car, under the hood of a classic car. I'm really into muscle car culture, and images of damage to national parks during the government shutdown. So this was in an exhibition, the first show at Shulamit Nazarian in LA, and that whole show was kind of my war painting show, my versions of war paintings, and they were just about like basically men ruining things. A lot of my sculptural motifs also find their way into the painting's surface. So this painting on the right is a painted corner rainbow. Sometimes I stencil them. Sometimes I have vinyl cutouts that are on the wall behind paintings, peeking out from behind the edges of things. So I see these symbols as being very mutable and very direct and specific, but also super nebulous and just kind of in the air. So they crop up and find their way into different series in different ways with different materials. Each of the painting on the right is from my contained painting series, and each of those is a painted canvas and a painted frame. They're usually painted separately and then put together and painted again, so that the painting extends onto the frame. These are a couple of the suspended pieces that I'm referring to that are standalone. I started making these in 2016. I use them. They are obviously, works unto themselves, but they also punctuate my installations. So I've come to, I feel like they're such a part of my visual language now that sometimes I feel like I need one in every show. But they're CNC routed from dye bond, hung from very simple cotton or nylon cord, very simple hardware, ball chain, sometimes either rainbow or black webbing, and they're usually, for me, stand-ins for emotional states. That's how I think of them. You also find them, they're very ubiquitously in your weather app and Instagram filters and everywhere else. So I like that they have this sort of crossover to other parts of contemporary culture. This is a crazy installation I did in this little museum survey that I did in Germany last summer, in which the second room that they gave me or proposed to me had this extremely difficult architecture. These low walls were fixed and are the edges of a ramp to get into that higher part of the room. And what do you do with them? So I decided to sort of cordon offered, or maybe designate this space with the painted walls. There's actually, so much weird stuff, like the doorway, and it was low ceiling. There's just a ton of problems with this space. The socket covers. It was just like, what can I do? So I hung my sculptures parallel with the edges of those lower walls to kind of create this sort of a glass wall effect. So you would have to walk between the sculptures to get into the room. And it was a way of designating that space. So a few more examples of how I've sort of punctuated spaces with these. This is Dusseldorf, also from last year. I have a gallery in Dusseldorf that I've worked with since 2009. I'm going to have my 5th show there in January. This was the war painting show that I mentioned. That's an image of Joshua Tree, and at the bottom of the painting, rather, an image of Joshua Tree after damage during the shutdown, and then the manifold of a 60s muscle car, tire tread. I was thinking about Rosenquist's F-111 and kind of replacing the fuselage and the spaghetti with some of my own images that I felt were politically and socially relevant at the time. And then my grumpy double rainbow, of course. This is a 2-person show of my sculptures and Brian Calvin's paintings, another New York painter, or I'm sorry, is he in LA now, maybe, in Milan in 2017. I think this is the only time, it's one of 2 times that I've done a 2-person show where I've only shown sculpture, which is really, I felt like a big milestone for me because I was kind of known as a painter, and to have the opportunity to do this really felt like, I don't know, it felt great. This is the show that's kind of started everything. It's the catalyst for many series and extrapolations. It was in 2016, a solo show that I did in a loft on Great Jones Street in New York City, summer show. It was a show about California dreaming. I think at the time I described it conceptually as teenage dreams and adult letdowns. It's kind of the mode I was in. I'm still there. The dark side of the sunny disposition. I grew up in a very gray New England place, and I always thought California looked so awesome. Like on 90210, they had those outdoor lockers and stuff. And I was like, imagine going outdoors to go to your locker, and it'd just be sunny, and everything was okay. And it's taken me a long time to realize that there's a flip side to all that. So the show is titled Santa Cruz, after the iconic surf brand, and it dealt with a lot of kind of small moments. There were vinyl cutouts on the walls that were sort of like a teenage girl's bedroom scrawlings. These giant paintings from my photo build series with wraparound, gradient, digital images printed on UV vinyl. But from this show, I've extrapolated like 10 bodies of work, both with analog digital components, flipping between representation and abstraction, going back to materials such as hand-dyed rope and the painting that you see in the background. The show had 3 large-scale paintings from a series that I started in 2011 called the Photo Builds. They always have a digitally printed element that wraps around the canvas. You can see that it doesn't touch the canvas. It casts a shadow onto it. Sometimes there's two canvases and the band covers a split between them. Multiple canvases are really your friend if you're moving everything yourself in your studio. But these are basically signboards, sort of like the deli sign or the sign on the Bank of America sign. There's like kind of a commercial presentation, but it's become a band within which I've put everything from a simple Photoshop gradient to commercial signage like the NASCAR Sunoco piece, which that series was about, again, about national parks. And, you know, you have to stop for gas to fill up your SUV before you drive onto Navajo land and, you know, of that whole dichotomy. So these have kind of grown and changed throughout the years and taken on new content and taken on new materials. And I even got to do one outside. This is the only one I've done outdoors, I think. This is in Detroit in 2018. This piece conflated moves from two series, actually, the photo builds and a series called Oil Slicks, which aren't in my presentation, but they all have this sort of, these abex gestures, the drip and the gestural brushstroke on this kind of psychedelic black background. The photo builds have come to be kind of like my compilation series. They're where I work out a lot of the crazy combinations of everything that are then later separated out and investigated as their own series. Getting into really recent stuff, and speaking of facades, which is kind of what the photo builds are leaning toward and inspired by. This is a mural that I was commissioned to do last fall in St. Louis. It is 50 feet long, 12 feet tall, and I decided to hand paint it because I'm a masochist, and stenciled with these black drips. So I was asked to do this mural. This is obviously an in-progress shot. It's all paved and nice now, and they're unveiling these in September. But I was given my choice of a few spots, and I knew that nobody was going to take this low building. But this low building was like perfect for my work. It was everything I make large-scale paintings. I always hang them low. Something about this kind of lateral move instead of a tall facade. And then I looked at all the surrounding works, which are super graphic, and I was like, what can I do here to not just make like cacophony? So I decided that my best contribution would be to create something super abstract, sort of a color spectrum that would connect other works that were on view and also be very much related to my paintings in the studio. So because the building is really low and the Midwest has these very dynamic cloud formations, I decided to cut into the plane of the sky. You can see it here. I decided that I wanted something to stick up off the roofline. I also wanted to do something that wasn't very mural-like. I'm not really a fan of murals. I don't know why, but there's something about like the way the paint always meets the ground that it's just like, I don't know. I've never liked them. I've never been into them. But I took the challenge. I really wanted to make something that was just super unique. So I had these black aluminum automotive painted cutouts made, the pixel heart, the cloud and rainbow, and they are affixed to the side of the building permanently. So I wanted the piece to function as a public piece, but also to take up another kind of space, a space that I had not seen a mural occupy. Another new project, just to take you into what I'm working on now. I have two public projects, which is really sort of unlike, I mean, this is like new territory for me. It's not super comfortable territory because you have to, so much pre-planning, which is not really my thing. And I talked about how much I like to make things additively with my hands in the studio and make things myself. So it's a lot of like being on the phone with like people at places and saying, well, what does it look like? And send me pics and whatever. I actually did see this piece in person and took these photos myself. I went to St. Louis to the fabricator to check it out. The same fabricator who made the pieces for the mural is making this for me. This is going to be permanently installed in an outdoor sculpture garden in France. and it will be unveiled in October. It's a giant yellow rain cloud made from aluminum. The cloud itself is aluminum, and the base is steel. And it's painted 1971 Plymouth Curious yellow, which might not mean anything to anybody if you don't like cars. These new public projects, this has been, like I mentioned, it's very, very challenging for me to get out, outside of my headspace and also to relinquish control. I'm not a great collaborator. I've never really done that. I have to admit it. At this point, I just have to admit it. I like to be in control of the aesthetic product. So it's been I'm getting better at it, but site specificity is what I find most intriguing. So any project that where you have to figure out how do you plunk something in this beautiful ancient French countryside. It's going to be in Lacoste. It's like a beautiful ancient city, and it's like going in this almost like a grotto type space with like a stone wall. And so I decided that I can't meld with the landscape. So I've just had to juxtapose it. I'm still trying to answer the questions like, how do you make a public sculpture that is iconic and that you're not going to look back on and think like, oh my God, why did I do that? And now it's permanent. And this is, I think I'm at my last two slides here, so don't worry. This is my most recent show. It's up for a couple more days. It's in Provincetown. At GA Gallery, which they have a gallery in Cologne and a gallery in Provincetown, which is fascinating. I've been going to Provincetown for years. It's one of my favorite places ever. I've always wanted to show there, and I finally got the opportunity. But that's another topic. But thinking about site specificity, I always want my shows to be, I never just hang paintings on the wall. Like, I don't make some stuff in my studio and then say, okay, choose the ones for the show. Like, that's just not, I've almost never done that. I make a few things if I'm in between shows, and then once I have the floor plan and I see the space, I start to think about what do I need to flesh this out conceptually. So this particular show, I wanted there to be this overarching mood. I also want shows to be like an album, the way you listen to an album, you listen to the spaces in between songs, and you're meant to hear those spaces. And now I feel like, I'm going to sound really old by saying this, but I don't care. Now it's like a bunch of singles that we put out in the world, and the exhibition is so important because it's the one space where the whole album can be seen together. And so I take it very seriously that each show is something beyond just some work hung in a room. Even if it's hung really nicely, there has to be something else. So for this one, I knew I wanted to show sculpture, but I didn't want it to be a very traditional show. Provincetown has a lot of super kind of stodgy traditional galleries, and no offense to them, I love them too. But I didn't want one of those shows where people were like, walking around with their hands behind their back, like leaning in for each thing and then walking to the next thing. So I wanted to necessitate like a non-standardized type of viewing. So I clustered all of these pedestals that I made in the center of the gallery. So it's sort of like this communal, separate pieces, but in a communal kind of state of mind. And then I painted a gradient on the wall, sort of like a sunset on the horizon. And, it's a summer show, so I wanted a summer vibe. I wanted something that spoke to the laid-back nature of the town itself, but also to our cultural moment. We're kind of in a place where we're putting our feelers out again. We're trying to get some semblance of normal back, and I just kind of wanted to speak to that with the show and have there be an element of casual to it. So that was just a small selection of work that I put together, and like I said, I skipped a bunch of stuff. I hope that it helps to illustrate my philosophy of studio momentum and letting the work tell you where it wants to go and kind of being fearless and ruthless and following that. And thanks. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it.
Did someone have a question in the back? Did you have a question? Yeah, I'm coming to you.
Hi, thanks. I'm sorry I forgot the photographer's name, but do you find walking around with the 8x10 on a tripod establishes your authenticity as a, I don't want to use the word real photographer, that helps you, it give you some authenticity for the folks to listen to you and maybe engage and accept your permission to take their photo?
Sorry. Yes and no, because more recently, it's usually not set up when I ask someone. So, like, I establish my authenticity a little bit more by showing them pictures I've made already on my phone, and say, this is what I'll walk up to someone and describe what I'm doing, and then I'll show them examples. And that, I think, once they see the pictures and I've explained the idea, they kind of get it, and they kind of know where I might be coming from.
Another question? Right here.
I have a question for Richard. Your pictures are amazing, and I did really appreciate the strangers touching each other pieces that you did. I'm just wondering, how do you find yourself when you're in this boundary of, I feel like you are skirting this in a not in an offensive way, but in a way that it's, you're like exploring a subject, but somehow it's, how do you not make it exploitative of the people that are the subject? And because they're in positions and places that I don't, are, that you're very different from, and so how do you find yourself exploring that in a respectful way, which I'm sure that you do. I would just like to know your process, which I guess was kind of that guy's question.
I guess, I mean, I don't know. I mean, no one obviously is going to say my intention is to exploit when asked that. And I mean, that's not my intention. But sometimes exploitation happens by, I think, a combination of inequities or of certain power dynamics. And the relationship, of course, is, I mean, I feel like when I ask a stranger if I can make their portrait, that they're giving a gift to me. There's a generosity, and there's no expectation that they have to do that. But I guess it's more like when I show them my pictures and try and convey that my work is about kind of a love and admiration for people, that I think people can see that and they put a little bit of trust in me. And then I think once that agreement has been made, it's my job to make a picture that does in no way tries and diminishes them and can either only elevate them or just kind of basically report on kind of how they appeared to me that day. I do try and stay, not always, but I don't know, a lot of people that don't have a lot of experience with portraiture are like, nobody's smiling in your pictures, they look miserable. And I'm like, I don't think that's what people are like, miserable if they're not smiling. I think we walk around generally more even and neutral, and when given like, when either say, oh, let's do a snapshot, let's do a selfie, we all smile, but it's not like, that's not how we look. And so I'm also trying to get at kind of like what I see when I saw someone that I found somehow the desire to make their photograph.
We have one more in the back over here.
Hey, so I have a question for Wendy, and I am a little selfish because I'm in your workshop, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I'm sure I'll learn more about it this week. To what extent do you feel like making aesthetically pleasing work in the beginning kind of cracked the door open for you to experiment and have that freedom? Like, do you feel like you were afforded the privilege to experiment because you made kind of more, beautiful things in the beginning?
Is this on? I don't know if I ever did make aesthetically pleasing work. I mean, the first, I don't know. I'm not sure I ever did. But let's say that I did. Let's say for the sake of the sake of your question, do I think that opened the door for making what? For experimenting later? Is that what you mean?
Because the tension between like the marketability of the work and having freedom in the studio is really fascinating. So I guess I just wonder. I mean, I believe they're beautiful.
Thank you.
So I'm just, yeah.
I mean, you gotta. Sometimes you make like a body of work for yourself. You make 3 bodies of work for yourself and 1 for them, or 3 paintings for yourself. Sometimes you got to give the people what they want, because some of those maybe less radical works fund the radical works. So for a long time, I wouldn't make small paintings because I wasn't a small painting painter. And I thought, I'm just going to make a small painting, even if the gallery's like, if you really made some small ones, we could probably like place those. But if everything is 20 feet, and people don't have apartments big enough for that stuff. And when I finally I say I'm not a good collaborator, but when I finally kind of collaborated a little bit more and saw that I could help myself by listening more, without without any integrity issue, that I kind of I could do both, that I didn't have to give anything up in order to do that. It got a little bit easier. I also think that as a woman, that there was less of a market in general, always. I mean, I'm just going to say non-existent at first. So I had complete freedom because I didn't have any market constraints to worry about. And I've always tried to see that as sort of a way into the art world that maybe if I'd had all that money, I wouldn't have done all that crazy stuff. I don't know. Maybe I would have just done the same thing over and over again. I don't know. Does that answer your question, sort of?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Do we have one last question? All the way over there. Okay.
My question was for Richard, and I was taken by and appreciative of your reference to several of the names of the subjects in your photos, and it really made me curious of what the nature of kind of the human connection is that you form with these people, and how that relationship informs your work. Like, do you ever have someone that you take a photo of and think, I really kind of like this person, I think we could be friends, and you want to hang out, or I don't know.
Yeah. I in general, most of the encounters are actually brief encounters, but you kind of hit the nail on the nose by suggesting that, perhaps we could be friends. A lot of them are made when I'm traveling, though, so, but there is one project, the Manhattan Sunday project, which was a nightlife project, and I photographed this one guy for the project, and he got edited out. Like, he's not in the book, but we ended up becoming really good friends. And he just celebrated his 50th birthday, and I was at his party last weekend, and that was like we were all supposed to say something about him, and I was like mentioned that I met him through photography, and instead of him making it into the book, he made it into my life. So. Like, Yeah, right.
Couldn't you have done both? Like,
It's true. It's true. Now I regret it. Can I ask you a question? Sure. Can you talk about the car culture and its influence in your work and on you? And why?
Yeah, sure. I grew up, my dad was a big car guy growing up, Pontiacs, and was always like fixing one up. Always had a daily driver that was whatever he was working on, and I just grew up around it, but I didn't get the invitation to the garage. And then when I became an artist and I realized that like studio and the garage were really kind of the same thing, and then like my dad and I finally had a connection, and then I started a project in 2016 related to car culture because I was interested in kind of dissecting some political leanings that I felt crossed over with that culture and investigate that in my own family. And that led me to buying a muscle car so that I could take it to car shows as part of the project as sort of a kind of a social experiment, because I was making work with a lot of these images in it, and I thought that I knew, I just wanted to know if what I thought was true. If I bought a car and went to car shows and talked to people, would they talk to me? Would they think I knew anything? Would I be able to infiltrate or be a part of this culture? Not infiltrate, that sounds like I was, no. I wanted to be, would I be allowed to be part of it? And I was really, really pleasantly surprised. It was an amazing experience. And now I have 2 1972 Plymouths, and my dad and I work on them together, and it's become this like, it's sculpture. It's like moving sculpture, So it's sort of an extension of my studio work and also a very fascinating subculture for me, having grown up with it. And and I just love it as American innovation. So not that I don't love European sports cars and all that stuff too, but something about the American muscle car, like pure Detroit steel. And I know they take gas, and it's not very popular, but I don't drive them that much, so. That's not me, it's crazy. Is it better to have a car that you drive all the time that's a hybrid, or one that you drive a few times a year that runs on gas? So I'm trying to, sort of like, I'm trying to figure out how it collapses into my studio practice beyond using the images and that social part of that. But and I think mostly it was wanting to learn more about my dad, if I can be honest, and find a connection with him, and that's been incredible. And he's 80 now, so I just spend every moment I can. Like, I'm about to start breaking things just so I can be like, help, I need to fix this. But actually, we've got both cars running so great now that it's like, actually, I should knock on wood, because every road trip brings its own challenges. But yeah, I don't know, that's how I came to it, and now it's kind of floating in there and is part of my symbology.
Yeah.